Those words weren't spoken by a renowned doctor, nor by a foreign-certified neurologist. They came from a barefoot street boy, with a smooth black stone in his pocket and a level of faith that could shake even the coldest skeptic. Sounds absurd, right? In a world where we trust million-dollar machines more than the power of the soul, someone offering healing through visualization and mental exercises almost sounds offensive. But what if I told you that this boy actually achieved what no expert could? What if real rehabilitation didn't happen in a fancy hospital, but in a greenhouse, with dirt on your feet and purpose in your heart? Have you ever stopped to think how many ideas you've dismissed just because they came from the wrong mouth? How often do we reject truth because of class, appearance, or accent? This story isn't just about a girl learning to walk again. It's about challenging a system, about power versus innocence, about wealth versus humility, and about what happens when we let go of prejudice and choose to believe. There's a kind of silent justice that only life can serve. And sometimes, it comes from where you least expect, a young orphan with scars on his body but light in his eyes. If you think this is just fiction, maybe it's because you haven't yet learned to see faith miracles disguised as coincidence. What you're about to witness is more than an inspiring story, it's an invitation to rethink everything you believe about healing, purpose, and human worth. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at a black stone the same way again. That morning, under the golden sky, the central plaza was buzzing with sounds, smells, and rushing footsteps. But right there, among bored guards and indifferent tourists, a barefoot boy with eyes far older than his age, little Benicio, approached a man dressed in the coldness of wealth. Don Ezequiel Santamaria, owner of a mansion guarded by walls as tall as his pride, barely noticed the presence of humility in the air until he heard something unthinkable. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." His daughter, Isabella, bound to a wheelchair, looked at the boy with the kind of faith adults unlearn too early. That simple moment planted a seed of faith in the heart of doubt. It felt like a scene out of a novel, a silent miracle, an orphan boy facing social prejudice, standing firmly in front of the man who symbolized everything he never had. But Benicio wasn't offering pity. He was offering purpose. In his hand, he held a smooth black stone, gleaming, alive almost, more than just an object. It carried a silent prayer, filled with visualization and personal reconstruction. This moment reminds us that sometimes, the spirit of someone who has lost everything is the only force capable of giving back what doctors have deemed impossible. And the most curious part? No applause, no cameras, no dramatic music. Just one wounded soul speaking to another, connected by an invisible wound that words can't explain. What would you do if a street kid said he could do what science hasn't managed? Most would laugh. But Isabella didn't. She looked at Benicio like someone learning to believe again. And there, between the sound of a distant fountain and the smell of warm bread, everything started to change. And as you can imagine, that was just the beginning. Beneath the shade of a centuries-old tree in the plaza, with the breeze playing gently through Isabella's hair, Benicio made a bold request: just 1 hour. 1 hour, he said, to activate something that even the most advanced rehabilitation clinics had failed to reach. This wasn't con artistry, it was visualization powered by genuine belief. Kneeling before the girl, as if guided by something ancient, he handed her the black stone. The object pulsed in his small fingers, almost as if alive. "Don't think about your feet, feel what it was like to run after a kite, to step into a cold stream," he said with the calm conviction of a prophet in rags. His words, laced with innocence and the power of faith, weren't just sounds. They were a kind of alternative therapy that triggered more than muscles, they awakened memories. Isabella closed her eyes, clutching the stone tightly, and began one of the guided mental exercises Benicio had taught. Then, right there, with her skeptical father standing nearby, she whispered, "I felt something." For a fleeting moment, like a whispered prayer to the heavens, she felt her feet. There was no movement, not yet, but something deeper, her soul remembering what it once knew how to do. And that is far more powerful than any medication. Ezekiel froze. The silence that followed was thicker than the wealth in his pockets. For the first time in a long time, money wasn't the answer. What he witnessed was a child of a forgotten social class, dusty and bruised, accessing his daughter's spirit with something no specialist had managed: belief. This wasn't just physical stimulation. It was spiritual ignition. Benicio, even with a shattered life, carried within him the force of a miracle. Ezekiel wasn't a man who left questions unanswered. Back in his mansion, surrounded by polished floors and the smell of waxed wood, something kept pulling at him. This wasn't just a random meeting in the central plaza. It had the scent of fate, or perhaps, of silent justice. Buried in old reports, forgotten contracts, and dusty databases, he found the name, Benicio Arrieta. The boy who touched his daughter's feet was also the sole survivor of a crash involving one of Ezekiel's company trucks. An accident that had killed Benicio's parents and shattered his life, but not his purpose. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began aligning like a tragic symphony. The orphan wasn't just another forgotten face, marked by social discrimination. He was someone forged in a fire of loss, guided by an invisible purpose, carrying a soul that refused to collapse. Benicio bore within him the invisible wound of a stolen childhood. And more than that, he was returning hope to the daughter of the man whose company had destroyed his family. Among folders and files, Ezekiel felt the weight of power versus innocence knock on his heart like a muffled storm. But recognition doesn't always come with gratitude. Sometimes, the human spirit has to be confronted with its own arrogance to awaken. Ezekiel realized that Benicio wasn't seeking revenge, he was the embodiment of a living prayer. A reminder that the universe can use pain to bring healing. The boy hadn't appeared by chance. He was the answered prayer no doctor could prescribe. And with that, Ezekiel began to understand, something much greater was unfolding. Driven by an unease that wouldn't let him sleep, Ezekiel stepped outside the marble corridors of his mansion and entered a world he had long ignored. What he found was tucked behind an old hospital, where the scent of rubbing alcohol mingled with stale coffee. There, in a humble rehab center, worked the enigmatic Dr. Milcar Carbustos, a street doctor who had traded luxury clinics for conviction. No fancy machines. No framed diplomas. Just faith. It was here, among society's forgotten patients, that Ezekiel discovered the truth: Benicio had learned to walk again. Not through instant miracles, but through unwavering visualization, fierce discipline, and practices that defied traditional therapy. Every muscle became a prayer. Every fall, a lesson. Every scar, a declaration of purpose. While others surrendered to pain, Benicio had turned his own soul into a laboratory for personal reconstruction. And that, my friend, is one of life's great secrets. Emotional healing is possible, but it requires courage. No shortcuts. Milcar spoke with the calm strength of a man who knows the weight of words. This boy, he doesn't play the victim. Ezekiel listened, humbled. He no longer saw the boy as a stranger, but as someone whose soul had been chosen by his daughter long before his logic caught up. In that place, without luxury but full of truth, Ezekiel understood, true wealth isn't in a greenhouse beside a mansion, it's in those who survive and choose to heal. Back at his mansion, Ezekiel looked at the greenhouse with new eyes. Once a space for rare flowers and meaningless meetings, it had become a sanctuary. Benicio, with the resourcefulness of someone who once improvised his own survival, built makeshift braces using curtain straps, wooden scraps, and fabric from an old shirt. Nothing sterile, nothing academic. But everything infused with purpose. There, beneath humid sunlight and trailing vines, he guided Isabella through subtle, strategic exercises, waking up muscle memories long thought lost. As the girl tried to lift her body, tremors ran down her legs like shy lightning before a storm of breakthrough. Isabella's spirit began cracking through the shell of fear, led by a faith not found in textbooks but in lived experience. Mansion guards showed up, drawn by rumors of something strange happening in the greenhouse. But seeing the boss's daughter moving her legs for the first time in years, they froze. That moment carried the weight of a miracle, not something explained by medicine, but by soul. Ezekiel stepped in. "He stays," he said, voice thick with emotion. No longer the man of cold wealth, but a father witnessing the impossible. In that moment, the wall between wealth and humility shattered. For anyone who thinks faith changes nothing, watch a muscle respond after years of silence. Benicio wasn't just teaching a girl to walk, he was proving to the world that even with a black stone in your pocket and scars on your heart, something greater can be awakened. The days that followed transformed the greenhouse into more than a place of recovery, it became sacred ground. Isabella, once prisoner to her own body, now smiled during every step. Benicio wasn't a certified therapist. He was something more. He connected with her soul, using rituals of visualization, stories from nature, and mental exercises that felt like echoes from another time. Slowly, both she and Ezekiel came to trust him, like someone heaven had chosen when science ran out of options. Then came Dr. Beltran, a prestigious neurologist, known for clinical precision and concrete diagnoses. He watched the tremors, the smiles, the progress. And for a moment, even he couldn't hide his awe. "It's real, but maybe temporary," he murmured, trying to balance reason and humility. Meanwhile, the Maya Clinic staff began to whisper complaints. How could an orphan street kid, unlicensed and untrained, do what months of formal therapy couldn't? Truth is uncomfortable, especially when it comes from outside the system, and carries a black stone. But results don't lie. Isabella could now hold her own body weight. Her eyes gleamed with a type of confidence no injection could bring. Ezekiel began to see how invisible walls, discrimination, prejudice, institutional pride, were being taken down by a boy armed only with faith, discipline, and a story of survival. Tension rose, but so did something stronger, hope. And when hope gains momentum, the impossible starts to look like a matter of time. There were setbacks. Days when tears spoke louder than progress, and Isabella's muscles refused to cooperate. Not even the deepest visualization exercises seemed to help sometimes. She cried. Benicio waited patiently. "Remember the stream. The wind. The running," he whispered. He never promised easy miracles, only consistency. When the medical board imposed a formal evaluation, Benicio nodded without resistance. There was nothing to prove, only something to feel. During that trial period, Ezekiel watched silently. He no longer saw the boy as a visitor. He saw him as someone his daughter's soul had chosen, long before he understood why. And then, it happened. On a golden afternoon, the greenhouse filled with the kind of silence that precedes the extraordinary. Isabella stood. First trembling, then determined. 3, 4, 5 steps, unsupported. Not even the orchids in bloom could match the light in her eyes. This wasn't just physical. This was visible emotional healing. Ezekiel, a man who had purchased half the city without shedding a tear, had to look away to compose himself. This wasn't about walking. It was about release. And the black stone in Benicio's pocket felt lighter that day. That night, during a quiet dinner with no speeches or toasts, something profound was sealed. Ezekiel handed Benicio a small memory box, inside, adoption papers. A simple gesture. A sacred shift. The orphan boy now had a home. Silent justice had been served, no headlines, no glory. Just healing. And somewhere in the corner of the greenhouse, between tropical leaves and gentle shadows, Benicio rested, for the first time, without the weight of having to prove his worth. But as you already know, real healing always opens the door to something greater. Now that you've come this far, let me ask you, how many times have you stopped believing just because something seemed impossible? How many chances for emotional healing, personal transformation, or spiritual growth have passed you by, disguised as something simple, like a black stone in the pocket of someone society ignores? This story is a powerful reminder that faith doesn't need certificates. It needs courage, consistency, and soul. So ask yourself, what part of you is still paralyzed? And more importantly, who or what have you been ignoring that might be the very key to your healing? The answer doesn't always come from a doctor. Sometimes it comes from a child. Sometimes, from within. So I invite you to think deeply, to look at those stones you've left behind. One of them might hold your greatest strength. And if this story meant something to you, if it touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. The journey continues, and here, we'll always dive into stories that challenge, inspire, and transform. After all, learning to walk again is something we all need, even if we're already on our feet.